Okay, so we are now recording and I'll kick off the webinar. So as I was saying before, really keen to make this as interactive as possible. So please put your hand up when you've got a question. I'm going to go through a lot of different things. And if you've got a question at the time, I think it's much better you raise your hand at the time and we can answer that question at the time. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to go through the wage subsidy. Obviously, it's probably the biggest talking point at the moment. We'll go through some commonly asked questions. As I mentioned, we have been getting a lot of questions. A lot of them are good questions, and I really want to be able to, I guess, share those answers with all our clients. We're going to go through some IRD updates. So there are a few, I guess, tax things we put in place that are going to help you as clients get through. We're going to move to then an Ask Me Anything question, anything related to tax and COVID-19 wise, not anything in general, I guess, but I guess feel free to ask whatever you want. I can always turn that question down. And then I'm going to give some suggestions around what to do during lockdown. I mean, some of you will be in different situations. Some of you will be able to work, some of you won't. And so it's really about what to do with that time. And then I want to jump in at the end and find out what is working for you. So over the past 2 to 3 weeks, I've been hearing a lot of good things about what you're doing, and it'd be great if you can jump on and share. You don't need to turn on your video, just turn on your microphone. Be really good. If something's working for you, I think it's really important that we can all bandy around each other and support each other during this really difficult time. So to kick things off, I mean, obviously we've got the government wage subsidy. A lot of you know about it. Just want to do a quick poll to see who's actually claimed the wage subsidy. I'm just going to launch this poll now. Where are we? Yeah. And if you could just click on the applicable answer, and then I'll be able to share the results with you shortly.
No, bigger.
Okay, we've got about 8 people left to jump in. I'll cancel this in about 5 seconds. So. Okay, right. So I'm just going to share the results. As you can see, a lot of you have claimed the subsidy. I think the government predicted that probably 80%, if not 90%, would claim the subsidy. This is suggesting that 95% of the attendees have, which I guess is good. I mean, it's certainly a great financial resource being made available by the government. So for that one person who hasn't yet, we'll go into some of the details around how you do claim. But if you don't qualify, then it's good that you haven't actually claimed it yet. But we'll get onto that. That's actually one of the frequently asked questions, which I'll get onto shortly. I'm just going to go back and share the screen. So what is the wage subsidy? I'm not going to spend too long about how to apply for it, since most of you have already. Essentially, it's if your actual or projected revenue is 30% or more down on the corresponding month last year. If you haven't been around for 12 months, then it's comparing this month or the month January to June against a comparable month. Usually would be the previous month. If you do qualify for it, then you get a lump sum of $7,029.60 for every full-time staff member and a lump sum of $4,200 for every part-time staff member. Just really important to note that the government have changed the rules, and you must actually keep staff employed for 12 weeks after applying for the subsidy. I've got a question later on around what happens if staff leave or you have to let them go before then. And another thing that's come out this week is that there will be a list of businesses, there is now, a list of businesses who have applied for the subsidy online. So employees can actually tell whether you as the employer have applied for the subsidy, when I'm sure you've shared that information with them anyway, but just a heads up that that is now online. So what do I pay my staff? This, I would say there is a whole bunch of different variations around how much you're supposed to pay your staff. What you have to do is go online or any forum and you'll see about 10 different answers, a lot of misinformation out there. So I did send through the case studies, I think 5 case studies last weekend, but I'll just go through them now. But I think for more detail, just refer to those case studies that I sent out last weekend. If you can't find the email, let me know and I can resend it to you. Essentially, the first situation is when your usual pay is above the wage subsidy, when staff members is, then as the employer, you're required to pay them the higher amount of 80% of their usual wages or the amount of the wage subsidy. At the very least, you have to pay them the wage subsidy, and I'll get to that shortly. If a staff member's usual weekly pay is below the wage subsidy, there is a misconception you have to pay them out the full wage subsidy. That's not actually the case. It's not designed that staff members get a pay increase from the wage subsidy. So in that situation, you pay them 100% of their usual wages. In the case where the usual pay is above the wage subsidy, but 80% of the usual wages below the wage subsidy, then you have to pay them the wage subsidy. So let's say the usual pay is $700, 80% of that comes to less than the $585, so you have to pay them the wage subsidy. If in this situation they're working less than 80% of their usual hours, then you need to still pay them the 80% of their usual wages or the wage subsidy at the very least. So that's the situation. They might be working, say, 2 days a week, in which case it's normally would be 40% of what they normally get paid. You still have to pay them for the 80%, even though they're only working part-time. In some situations, there are some employers who are actually working the same or more hours than usual. In that situation, that's actually an employment law situation where you have to actually pay them the hours that they're working. So that's the usual hourly rate times the hours they work. I get a few questions about people saying, look, actually my business is not operating. Look, we really are pretty stretched. in the situation to pay 80%, that's actually going to mean I have to dip into my own pocket and pay $200, $300, $400 in addition to the wage subsidy. And I really can't afford that with no income coming in. So under the wage subsidy, if you can prove that you can't afford to top your staff up to that 80%, and you can get away with just passing on the wage subsidy. The proof, as far as we're aware, you've got to be not trading. That's the starter. I'd also recommend getting advice from your accountant, i.e. me in this case, just to advise that, yes, in my opinion, you really can't afford to top up the staff's wages to the 80%. What we're trying to do really is keep businesses still trading after the lockdown period is finished. I mean, there's obviously a lot of pressure from staff to say, look, actually, I can't afford to get paid in less than 80%. I've seen a lot of clients actually who also can't afford to top them up. So my advice for the greater good to keep the employees with a job post the lockdown or post the 12 weeks wage subsidy is to actually just pay the wage subsidy if you really can't afford to top it up and pay the 80%. Few questions around the government wage subsidy and the tax on it. So there is no GST on the wage subsidy. That's the first, I guess, main point. We have set up an account code in Xero for each of you for the wage subsidy, and there is no GST on that code. So it will not go as part of your GST return. As to whether there's income tax, again, there's quite a bit of confusion around whether there's income tax on the wage subsidy. So there are three main, I guess, examples of where we've got to assess this. The first one is if you pass on the wage subsidy to your employees. When you pass it on, put it through the payroll system, POEE, ACC, etc. is taken off, and therefore the employee is essentially having tax deducted from that. Because as the employer, you've received the money and passed it straight back out, there's actually no tax deduction for the wage you're paying, but there is no tax payable on that wage subsidy. So essentially it's tax neutral if you are passing it on to employees. If you're a shareholder employee, I've just actually got a question here, so I might just jump into that. All good, no problem. If you're a shareholder, then and you take a shareholder salary at the end of the year, essentially it is taxable to you in the sense that part of that's going to form your shareholder salary. So again, there is tax on that. If you are self-employed, this is probably the biggest one that's misconceived. If you're self-employed, because that income is going to stay with you, then essentially that income is taxable. So the account code that we set up for self-employed people includes contractors, is going to be a taxable one. So that income will form part of your taxable income in the year in which you receive it. I'm just going to jump in and do a quick poll though, just to find out a bit more about how you're impacted as a business. So, I mean, obviously, we've seen a lot of our clients who are not able to trade. Some are able to trade. But just good to get a feel across the room as to how impacted you've been. So I'll just start this poll now. Okay, just give it another couple of seconds. Okay, I'll just share those results once they're calculated. So as you can see, the majority of you have ceased trading completely. That definitely does seem to be I guess, the majority of situations across New Zealand. A lot of businesses have been impacted. We're going to talk later on in the webinar just around, is there a way for you to be able to trade partially during the lockdown, but we'll get onto that shortly. Okay, I'll just share my screen again. So on to the commonly asked questions. As I said, over the past couple of weeks, we have had a lot of questions, which is great. We are here to help. But I thought I'd just share some of the common ones, since I figure if one client's asked, and I suppose a few others will have asked as well. So the first one is, do I need to pass on the wage subsidy in one lump sum to staff? So I think the confusion around this was the leave payment, which was essentially when people had to self-isolate for 14 days. That's now been put to one side by the government. But was the leave payment, essentially you apply for that on behalf of your employee, passed on in one lump sum? Was the wage subsidy? No, you do not pass it on in one lump sum, so they don't get the full 7,029 if they are full-time staff, or 4,200 if they're part-time staff. You pay them weekly, and you put the pay through the payroll system. So next question, do staff get paid the wage subsidy plus the hours they work? So yeah, really good question again there. I've got that quite a few times. And it's in a situation where maybe your employee's working 10 hours a week. There is some thoughts that they get paid the 10 hours plus the wage subsidy. That's not the case. That was covered in one of the case studies I mentioned earlier. In this situation, if their hours that they work are less than 80%, then I just get paid the 80% or the wage subsidy. Next question, can I make staff redundant during the 12 weeks of wage subsidy? And this isn't, I guess, this might sound like a pretty mean question on behalf of the employer, but that's not the case. I mean, as businesses working their way through the 12-week period, they might actually find, look, actually, our business has changed significantly, and at the end of the day, we actually can't afford to employ all our staff outside of the 12-week wage subsidy. With the wage subsidy, one of the conditions, though, is that you do need to keep your staff employed for 12 weeks. So my recommendation here is that you shouldn't make staff redundant during the 12 weeks, still pay them out the wage subsidy, but be in communication with them for after that 12-week period. You're still able to make them redundant after then. However, I would, of course, suggest trying to keep all your staff employed post the lockdown if you can, to get your business back up and running. But that's something you really do a lot of work around, is whether actually you'll have the work for them or the cash flow, to be able to pay their wages. We can certainly talk about that offline if you are looking to make that decision. Next question I've got is, should I pay staff 100% of their usual wages? That's really on the back of a lot of employers saying, look, I can't afford to take a pay cut. I've got rent. I've got family to feed. My partner's lost their job. Look, there is, I guess, there are a lot of in-need families out there who are your employees. At the end of the day, if you can pay them 100% of their wages, then that's fantastic, and certainly a good move from you as an employer. But at the end of the day, I would suggest that most of you, as we saw in the poll before, your businesses are impacted. You're not trading. You're either trading part-time or not at all. You probably can't afford to pay your staff 100% of their wages. So I would say the answer to that is only do that if you absolutely have the cash and you can do that. Otherwise, 80% of their normal wages or the wage subsidy would be the way to go. You hear a lot of really in need stories from your employees, but you're also in need as well. The next question is, do staff pay tax on the wage subsidy? I've had quite a few questions about that. Usually it's fueled by one employee hearing that they don't have to pay tax on it. They tell the other employees, and you get 10 employees ringing up and saying, hey, you've taken tax, POE off my wages. You shouldn't have done that. That's not the case. The wage payment must go through your wages system, your payroll system, and income tax is taken off that. Income taxes in POE and ACC. I am getting a few questions coming through. I'll just run through these commonly asked questions and then pause and then go and answer those questions then. One of my staff has already applied for the wage subsidy for another job. Can I also apply for them? So that can happen when you've got part-time staff. So maybe they're working 20 hours for you and 20 hours for someone else. So the government have actually put some information on the website on this. And so the answer is yes, you can actually apply for 2 wage subsidies for the same person, provided they meet the criteria. So as long as they're working 20 hours for you, then you can apply for them on a full-time basis. The other employer can also do the same thing. The MSD are tracking who's applying for the wage subsidy. So I would suggest you don't kind of go overboard. If they're only working 10 hours for you, make sure you just apply for the part-time wage subsidy. But yes, you definitely can apply for the subsidy if they've already had the application made by another employer. You cannot, however, apply for the same employee under your company twice. Next question is, do I have to pay back any unspent subsidy? That question is really coming about from what happens if lockdown finishes after 4 weeks, and of course you've been given 12 weeks of the wage subsidy. Or in the event that your staff member normally earns, say, $200 a week, under the rules, you're getting $350 a week for them. You only have to pay them on that $200. The advice we've got to date is there will be no amount to pay back. Essentially, that is your money to use to pay on overheads. You can, of course, use maybe the unspent money for your lower cost staff to top up the 80% for your higher paid staff. That has to be your decision. But at this stage, we don't think you'll need to pay back any of that subsidy. Another question, I applied for the wage subsidy and my revenue won't actually be 30% down on the same time last month. So that was a situation we've seen a couple of times with the lockdown in April. A lot of people figured that their revenue would be down by 30% or more, and in most cases it is. You are allowed to apply for the wage subsidy on the expectation that your revenue for future months, be it April, May or June, will be 30% or more down. If it gets to the end of that period and in actual fact your revenue wasn't down by 30% or more, my take on that is you will probably need to pay that wage subsidy back. So I would recommend just keeping those funds handy. There is some information on the COVID-19 website now about how to pay it back. And essentially what you do is you ring up the COVID-19 helpline, you explain your situation, you explain what amount you think you have to pay back, and then they will, the person on the line will basically confirm or disagree with your situation, and then they'll give you details for how to pay that back. But essentially what I'm saying is if revenue doesn't end up being 30% down, I think as a safe option, you're best just to put that money to one side so you're in ability to pay that back. Another question I've get often is my staff think that they are entitled to more wages. What do I do? As I mentioned before, often if one staff member starts having those questions, they're probably going to talk to the other staff members, and you might get maybe all of your staff or half of your staff asking you the same thing. Essentially in that situation, all you can do is refer them on. You can send through my case study that I sent through last week to them. I'm more than happy to talk to the employee, or they can look on the COVID-19 website. At the end of the day, some of your staff may have already called up the COVID-19 helpline or looked on the website. And essentially, as long as you're abiding with the rules, then you're absolutely fine. But you have to bear in mind that staff, they probably have taken a pay cut in a lot of cases, and I guess they probably missing the extra money. So they're gonna try and get as much wages as they can, this is human nature. But as long as you're paying within the requirements, then you've got nothing to worry about. Okay, last page of commonly asked questions. Will there be any further government funding in addition to the wages subsidy? That's a good question. At this stage, the government said they are working on a back to work package. What that means, I don't know. They haven't released the details on it. You'd have to assume that if the lockdown did last longer than 4 weeks, there could be some more funding on the way. At this stage, we don't know, but rest assured we are monitoring the situation, and we'll come back with an all-client email if we know of anything further. Because mainly, I guess the big issue for a lot of you as business owners is that the wages subsidy covers your biggest cost, which is wages, which is usually your biggest cost, but it doesn't cover your other costs. For example, rent, and we'll get to rent a bit later in the presentation. Will businesses go back to normal after lockdown ends? Yeah, that's I guess the real uncertainty. No one really knows that. Fully appreciate that it's a very much an uncertain time for you all right now. I don't know the answer to that. I guess only time will tell. But you can certainly do a few things, which we'll get into shortly, to hopefully mean that when lockdown finishes, you can go back to operating as best as you can. And last question, and obviously not nice to get asked the question, but absolutely understand that some of you are thinking, look, should we just close the business? What I'd recommend is giving that decision some time. I mean, a lot of you have been running businesses for a while. It's a big decision to close. Look, at the end of the day, there will be businesses that will need to close as a result of COVID-19. Hopefully it's not any of your businesses. But if you are making that decision or thinking about it, please just make sure you give yourself some time. Run through some numbers. Happy to help out there. But just make sure that's not a decision that is rushed. One thing I will say is that it's likely that there will be businesses closing. There will be a lot of unemployment. Grant Robertson has been very clear about the fact that unemployment will be higher than the global financial crisis. So if you do end up closing your business, you need to have a think about, look, what am I going to do? Will I go and get a job? If so, you could have a lot of competition for those jobs with high unemployment. Also bear in mind that running the business can be very stressful, as I'm sure you all know, but there are some good perks. I mean, you are your own boss. You get a few tax perks. And I think there's quite a shift mentally from being the boss to being an employee. Some people love shifting back to being an employee without the stress, whereas some people actually quite miss, I guess, the interest and the challenge of being a small business owner. Right, well, that's pretty much the commonly asked questions I normally get. I have had a few more questions come through, so I'm just going to go and look to answer those now. The first question was, have you started yet? I'm not going to, yes, we have started. I think maybe that was asked earlier on. Next question I've got is, what happens if we pay staff for 1 week and then they resign? Good question. I think if they resign, then they're probably a little misinformed with the wage subsidy, because at the end of the day, they're entitled to the next 11 weeks. My understanding in that situation is you would need to pay back essentially the 11 weeks for the employee who's resigned. Next question I've got is, are there any additional requirements for paying wages with Easter annual leave? So that situation, annual leave is just treated as any other business day. So essentially, if they were normally going to get their wages on Anzac Day or Easter, you did say Easter in the question, then essentially it's just any other working day. So if you pay them 80%, they'd get 80% of their normal wages on Easter. The same thing if they're getting paid the wage subsidy, they'd get the wage subsidy. Just treat that public holiday as any other day. Another question I've got is, there's talk about dates you applied for the wage subsidy. Is there any difference in rules around which date you applied? Yes, there is. There's a few extra, I guess, fine print details if you applied for the wage subsidy after the 27th of March. The main difference there is that if you apply before the 27th of March, you had to make your best effort to keep the staff members employed for 12 weeks. After that date, 27th of March, you have to keep the staff employed for 12 weeks. So it's just more around not longer best efforts to keep staff employed, but it's actually a case of you have to keep staff employed. Next question is, can you pay the employees KiwiSaver contribution from the wage subsidy, and is it included as part of the 80% total? So that's a good question. Essentially, you've got to treat if you're paying staff the 80% of their wages, then you would deduct KiwiSaver as per usual. For example, if a staff member normally got $1,000 wages gross each week, you'd pay them $800 and the KiwiSaver would be included as per usual, as it usually was. So essentially the KiwiSaver contribution reduces to 80% as well. Another question, what happens if the employer resigns after receiving the 12-week subsidy? So just, I guess, just to clarify that question, so if you pay the subsidy out weekly for 12 weeks, then essentially they can resign after 12 weeks and there's no issue with that at all. That would only be, I guess, a case as if you chose to pay out the 12-week subsidy in one hit. You certainly don't need to do that. I'd recommend you don't do that. But if you have paid someone out the 12-week subsidy, essentially they've got the money. You wouldn't have to pay it back to MSD. But I would recommend, if you haven't already, just to make sure you're paying the wages weekly, not out of one lump sum. Okay, one more question I've got here. I've applied for the wage subsidy for my employees, but I forgot to apply for myself. What do I do? So yes, you can certainly reapply. So a business can reapply for the wage subsidy, but you can't apply for the same employee twice. So if you, for argument's sake, put in the wage subsidy for 5 employees, you forgot yourself, you can then make a separate application just for yourself. MSD are checking to make sure that the same employer is not applying for the same employee. So there are checks in place, but absolutely, if you forgot to add yourself, you should definitely do so. If you're entitled to the wage subsidy, it makes sense that you as a business can get whatever you are entitled to. I don't have any more questions on here. Maybe just I'll leave it 30 seconds for anyone else. Just type on the Q&A tab with a question if you've got. I'll just leave that 30 seconds, as I say. So the last question I've got is I can't see you. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. So no, I haven't got my video on because I am sort of scurrying around the back, putting slides in place, and it has been recorded. So I figured rather than having some rather interesting poses, we just run it off the screen. Believe me, it's probably a good thing, whoever's asked that question. Right, another question we've got, are there ways to legally make sure the April to May differential is as large as possible? I'm not going to mention that, who asked that question. Essentially, I guess where there is the ability potentially, if you were to defer income from, let's say, defer income from April, put it into May to make April revenue as low as possible. Because at the end of the day, the wage subsidy is comparing April this month, April to the same time, April 12 months ago. The answer to that is no, you shouldn't do that. At the end of the day, the government are going to do some audits on the situation as to whether you should have applied for the subsidy or not. Hard to know what those audits will be, but I would suggest that you want to operate on I guess, as honest a basis as possible, just in case you did get looked into. At the end of the day, the subsidy is definitely there to claim if you're eligible for it. But ultimately, if you're not eligible for it, it does in theory mean that there's less funds to go around for those other businesses. So my advice on that would be, please don't try and manage the way in which your revenue looks. Certainly there is potential to do that. So just essentially invoice as you normally would be my recommendation there. Another question we've got is, what if I can't make my tax payments, GST, PAYE, etc.? Are there options available? Yes, there are. I'm actually going to go through those in a further slide, so I won't answer that question just yet, but that's coming up shortly. Okay, so I've got no more questions. I will just give you another 30 seconds to ask any more questions before I get going. Okay, looks like there's no more questions, so I will keep going. So on the subject of tax, as I mentioned, as the last question mentioned around what if I can't afford to pay my upcoming tax payments. So we'll get onto that soon. Just a couple of updates starting from the 2021 financial year, which for most people is from 1 April 2020. So in the past, I think it was probably about 8 or 9 years ago, the IRD removed the ability for depreciation to be claimed on buildings. From 1 April 2020, they're actually bringing in that you can claim depreciation just on commercial buildings at a rate of 2% diminishing value. I would suggest, though, that, and that's obviously what they will allow is you to claim the depreciation, therefore pay less tax in the year. Just be mindful that in most cases, buildings do go up in value. So let's say you've claimed the depreciation, sell the building in 5 years' time. If you sell the building for more than the depreciated value, you will have to repay that depreciation you've claimed, depreciation recovered. So just be mindful that if you do take the deduction, you're probably going to end up paying back depreciation when you sell the building. I can certainly talk to you more about that on an individual basis if you're a commercial property landlord. Another big one actually is that low cost assets. So if you buy an asset that costs up to $5,000 GST exclusive, you can actually expense that in the tax year, just for this tax year we're in now, the 2020-2021 year. So that's from 1 April 2020 to 31 March 2021. The rule up until now has been if the asset is more than 500 GST exclusive, then you can claim it as an expense. Apart from that, it's got to be capitalised and depreciated. But for the 2021 year and now, that's up to $5,000. So that should, in theory, make quite a big difference. If you need to ramp up and buy assets for your staff, like new computers, you'll be able to claim that the cost of that back in the year we're in now, which is a really good thing from the ID. That is just temporary though. So that's just for the 2021 year. For the 2021 year though, so 2022 year, sorry, from April 2021 to 31st of March 2022 and beyond, the threshold will be increasing to $1,000. So that's a permanent change from next financial year. You'll be able to expense back the cost of assets up to $1,000 GST exclusive. So that should make a bit of a difference. Another thing is that the provisional tax threshold for the year we're in now is increasing from $2,500 to $5,000. So up until now, if your tax to pay was more than $2,500, you fell into the provisional tax threshold and you had to pay provisional tax throughout the year. We're in touch with you about what amount to pay. From this year onwards, it's increasing to $5,000. So if your tax to pay in any 1 year is, say, $4,500, you won't fall into provisional tax regime and therefore you won't need to pay provisional tax. Just to be clear, that's just to do with the timing of when you pay the tax. There still will be tax due, and if you're not paying provisional tax, any tax that is due will be payable in terminal tax. But of course, that's due 7th of April, the year after your balance date. You've got essentially 12 months to pay that tax. So it's just going to help a bit with deferring some of the cash flow out. Another thing the ID has put in place is that if you've got tax to pay from any time from the 14th of Feb, if it's due from the 14th of Feb 2020 onwards, if you can prove that your inability to pay the tax is due to COVID-19, and I'd suggest that that's pretty easy to prove, then the ID will not charge interest or penalties on the tax, provided you go into a payment plan with them. So the payment plan is not just deferring the tax straight away. You will need to enter into weekly or monthly instalments, and we can help you set those up with the ID. But the good thing is that the ID will not charge interest, nor will they charge penalties. Just a technicality on that is that they will charge penalties initially, and then once the core tax is paid off, we can then apply to have these penalties remitted, which they will remit. Apparently it's to do with their processes and their systems. They can't just wipe penalties. But essentially, you won't have to pay penalties in the long run, and we can sort that for you. So that's for all tax types. That's for GST, PAYE, income tax. So if you do think you're going to struggle to pay any of those tax types, just get in contact with us. When we send out your GST returns, we will be saying, hey, look, if you can't pay it, you can go into payment plan. But just bear in mind that you do have to go into a payment plan. You can't just say, I'm not going to pay that for 6 months. I would also suggest that depending on how long your business is impacted for, just because you can defer the payments, if you don't necessarily do it just because you can, what you don't want to end up is where you've got all these payment plans set up for, I guess you've got this tax building up. You still have to pay that core tax, less the penalties, of course, but I would just recommend you don't sort of just rack up all this tax, because it can be quite hard to catch up once you've done that. Okay, well, this was Ask Me Anything part. I guess in a lot of respects, everyone's already asked a lot of questions, but I will just stop sharing my screen. If you've sort of thought of any other questions after I've raised, gone through the tax implications, please just ask the question. You can ask the question through Q&A, or if you do want to ask it verbally, and don't be shy, just raise your hand and then I can turn on your microphone. So I'll just give it about 30 seconds again to get any more questions coming through. Okay, great, got some questions coming through. So a question here is, if the work hours fluctuate for each employee, do we change the amount we pay each week accordingly? So there's some advice on the COVID-19 website about this. Essentially, what you're trying to do is pay the average wage. So you want to go back and work out on average what the staff member receives. Otherwise, it's really difficult if they are fluctuating to kind of say, well, actually this week we think you would have worked 10 hours, this week you would have worked 15 hours. Really, really difficult to I guess, make those assumptions. So therefore, the advice is that you pay the average wages. So maybe go back. I mean, they say officially go back 52 weeks. That's quite a long time to go back. I'd recommend going back, say, at least 3 months and work out what the average wage is. Make sure you talk with the employee as well, just to let them know what you're doing, how you've calculated it, and then pay on that basis. The next question I've got here is, do you only have to be down 30% for 1 month of the 3 or across all 3 months? So that relates to the wage subsidy. So the whether to qualify for the wage subsidy, you've got to be down 30% on revenue for any of the months, January, February, March, April, May, or June. So that's 6 months. If you're down for just one of those months, then you can claim the full wage subsidy. So it is just the 1 month compared to the same month 12 months ago. As I mentioned, if you haven't been trading for 12 months, you can compare any of the Jan through to June against the most realistic comparable month. So I'll just leave it maybe another 30 seconds for any more questions to come through. So don't be shy if you want to put your hand up and jump on the mic. Otherwise, if you want to just type out your question, please do that through the Q&A. Okay, no more questions. So I thought I'd do another poll, just about how you're feeling in general. So we're about to move into another part of the webinar. Just want to really get to how you're sort of feeling through this whole process, because it can obviously be a stressful time. Just kind of keen to feel how you're doing. So I'll give you about 20 seconds to respond. Okay, I'll just end that now. So across the board, it's great that the predominant answer is positive. We'll get through this, which is great, because I think that actually mental attitude is really important at this difficult time. But completely understand if you're feeling stressed or worried. It is a very difficult time for a lot of business owners. All I will say is you're not in this alone. A lot of people are in the same boat. Make sure you reach out to your support network. But it's completely understandable if you are feeling stressed and worried, because it really is unprecedented. I was, not that I was around during the time, but I had heard a few comments made that this time similar to the Great Depression. I'm sure none of you were around then, but that just really shows how far back until anything like this has happened. So rest assured. So I'm just sharing those results now. I forgot to press the share button. You'll see there that the good thing is that most of you are feeling positive. Some are feeling in the middle and some are feeling stressed and worried. I will just go back now and share my screen. Actually, I've just had a few more questions come through, so I'll just jump on to those. Right, if we had to drop to 60% wages if lockdown is longer than 4 weeks, can staff, if they want to, top up to 80% or 100% with annual leave if they want to? So some would get 80%, some 100%. So the answer is yes, staff can voluntarily take leave and you can pay them out. Really important that the staff member has chosen to take leave and you're not forcing them to take leave, because that is an employment issue otherwise. So if they've got leave available, then they can take it, essentially, is the answer to that. That would obviously be paid in addition to the 80%. So essentially you might find that if someone's getting 80%, they might take 1 day's leave, and that's the extra 20% for the week. Question was that the poll never came up for us. Hopefully it has now. Sorry, I hadn't clicked on the button. That was a user error. Another question is, I'm more worried about my favourite rugby league team than my business. And based on that question, I actually know who your favourite rugby league team is. That's a very real concern, because I think favourite rugby league team is probably in a lot more trouble than a lot of other businesses. That is, of course, the Warriors. I'm sure we all support them, but we realise that they're probably in a bit of trouble. Okay, can employees use sick leave to top up wages? So same answer there with the leave is yes, they can. You can't force them to take the sick leave, but essentially I guess that sick leave doesn't get paid out when people resign, so I suppose some staff might choose to take sick leave. Really important question, one I can't actually help with, is when do we get the cup of tea and scone tea? That will depend entirely on when you've made them. I'd love to be able to put them through the web, but of course, we're in our bubble. We can't send food outside of our bubble. So that will be a DIY, unfortunately, on that one. Okay, so I'll just go back. Okay. Just sharing my screen. So that was the Ask Me Anything. Just really want to touch on, I guess, the point that a lot of people try to avoid, but I think it's really important during the lockdown, and that's mental health. Certainly get a lot more press lately, which is great. But first and foremost, it is a difficult time. You're not alone is the first thing I would say. There are plenty. Reach out to your network if you've got one. Obviously, reach out to us. Reach out to your friends and families. Make sure you're talking, because at this time, a lot of people are going through a difficult time, and the more we can all band together and support each other, the better. And recognise that it's actually okay to be feeling stressed and worried, because it is a difficult time for a lot of people. They say get regular exercise. I know for a fact if I don't get exercise, I get a bit cranky and a bit stressed, so it definitely works for me. Make sure you don't go down to the local mountain bike park and get in trouble like David Clark. But you're more than entitled to walk around your block. And I, for one, would recommend you do that. Even if it's 30 minutes a day, take the dog out for a walk, or just go for a walk yourself. Obviously, make sure you're staying 2 meters apart from anyone else. Also recommend have a daily routine, especially if you've got kids in the house. Kids can, obviously wonderful, but they can add a bit of extra stress. So if you're kind of building a daily routine for the kids and also for yourself, to make sure you are getting a bit of downtime as well. I do think it's important to be thinking about working on your business, but at the same time, you don't want to be doing that 24/7, especially in a current climate we're in, where you actually can't do anything, I guess, start trading, so it can be quite stressful. Also would say, look, if it is getting a bit much, and look, there's going to be people that will need to use this resource, Xero have a program available where you can actually log in and get 3 free counselling sessions. The sessions are entirely confidential. You do need to be paying for the standard Xero subscription. It doesn't count for cash books. If you want to know more about that, jump online to Xero XAP, or you could send that through to me, question through to me, and I'll be able to give you the link. Great resource that Xero is offering. And I say, if it is getting too much for you, please reach out, because the staff there are trained to help, and we are in unprecedented times. So really important to make sure you look after your mental health during this time. So now I've got some advice around what to do during the lockdown. First thing I would say is, can you operate online? If you can't, is there a way to do that? Can you sell your goods and services online? The government have relaxed the ability for some products to be freighted, or can you offer advice online? Just try and think of ways to actually, offer that ability online. You might even find that once the lockdown's finished, then it actually adds extra string to your bow. Secondly is, can your staff work remotely? So probably a bit late to set it up now if you haven't already, But if you're paying staff the 80% or even the wage subsidy, they are required to work for those hours if you've got work for them. Great chance to catch up on admin. So I have to admit that we've had a lot of our clients reconcile Xero very quickly for the end of March, which is fantastic, which means you're obviously using that time to catch up on admin. I will say also recharge your batteries. I mean, a lot of you have been working flat out for the past few years and not really taking a break. As a small business owner, it can be quite easy just to work 7 days a week or almost work mentally in your mind, even if you're not in the office. So use this time to recharge your batteries, catch up on, time with your family. It's unprecedented times, but I think there's still the ability to sit back and recharge your batteries. And plan for the future. Like a lot of people say to me, look, I'd love to do a budget or I'd love to plan for the future, but I don't have time. In a lot of cases, you probably do have that time. So, I mean, hopefully, grab a glass of vino in the evening, not now I'm suggesting, but whatever, and just, plan ahead. Really good time to do that without the pressures of, I guess, the day-to-day work going on. So I think that's something you should really look to be doing. I will just actually jump to a poll, though, before I move on to the next slide. Okay. So this poll's about operating online. So I'll just leave it with about 30 seconds for you to answer those questions, and I'll make sure I do share the results before I start talking about them this time. Okay. Okay, so in this case, actually, we've got a few people who can operate online. Unfortunately, the majority can't, and a couple of people working on it. I mean, I would recommend operating online if you can, but I fully understand that a lot of businesses just simply can't do that. Right, so I'll move on to the next slide. So finance is like a really important part. I am probably biased on this, but so what to do during lockdown in terms of your finances? I would recommend preparing a 2021 year budget or forecast. Some of you may have started working on that already into January, Feb. Because of COVID-19, I would suggest a lot of your budgets are probably no longer that relevant or that reliable. There's probably no point having a budget in place if you've been impacted by COVID-19. If you'd set that budget sort of 2 or 3 months or didn't factor in COVID-19. So I'm not usually one to suggest you keep changing your budget, but I think in this case, because of the impact COVID-19's had, then I think it's worthwhile updating and then loading that into Xero. If you need help with the budget or forecast, please reach out and saying that we are fairly busy, so we probably can't give you too much detail to put with the budget in the next couple of weeks, but absolutely we're looking to kind of touch base with you. I guess once our workload dies down a bit. But if you've got a quick question, please send that through. I think also just because of the lockdown, it's really important to prepare a weekly or monthly cash flow. So a lot of people prepare a budget, but not as many prepare a cash flow forecast. Given the times we're in at the moment, just to make sure you can get through, absolutely put that on paper or in a spreadsheet. As you know, I like to be paperless, so I'd say a spreadsheet, but put that down, just actually work out whether you're going to run out of cash. There are options if you are going to run out of cash, talk to the bank, look to reduce expenditure, but really important you've gone through the numbers and actually worked out whether that's going to be an issue. Speaking of cash, if you can, keep aside 3 months worth of operating expenses. Not easy to say, not as easy to do, but if you can get to that point, then I think it's going to stand your business in good stead. That's more of a tip for going forward as well. It's usually good if you can keep those cash reserves aside just to weather the storm on a rainy day. And I think I would say COVID-19 is probably a bit more than a rainy day. It's one of those horrible sort of tropical storms, but that would be good, I think. And it's also a good lesson for going forward if you can put aside 3 months. I mentioned before that wages are in most cases a business's biggest expense. Usually the second biggest expense, not all the times, but is rent. So make sure you talk to your landlord about reduced rent. there are a few legal opinions floating around about whether a landlord needs to or can actually charge you rent. I'm not going to go into those because they are legal issues, but I would suggest if your landlord's not playing ball, you probably need to first have a talk to them about it. And if you don't like the answer you get or you think it's not fair, perhaps just reach out to your lawyer to see whether there's any sort of legal standing you've got. Another option for finances is consider the payment plans with the ID. As I mentioned before, no interest, no penalties. You can defer your tax, but you've got to sign up to a payment plan. If you'd like to consider doing that, get in contact with us and we can talk you through how to set up a payment plan. We'll actually do it on your behalf, but we'll just talk through about the amounts you pay each week or month. Also important to stop your discretional spending. So in a lot of businesses, if you sit back and think about it, there are some items you probably don't need to be spending money on. I think in this current climate with the uncertainty and revenues reducing, you really want to put a hold on all discretional spending. That's not to say completely can it, but maybe just park it for now. If you're looking to look into a new service you're offering or looking to sign up with a new supplier or looking for some added extras, I think probably now is the time just to park those decisions because cash at the moment is going to be really important that you hold on to it. Just going to jump in and do a poll. Okay. It's a really important poll. Have you completed your 2021 year budget? I will be taking note of who hasn't, by the way. Okay, great. I'll just stop there and I'll share the results. There's not many that have, but it's okay. No one probably won't. Okay, fair enough. That is the incorrect answer, by the way. And then not yet, but I will. That's a pass mark. That's all good. Look, I think all joking aside, I think it's really important in this current climate we're in that you do prepare a 2021 year budget just to make sure that essentially you know what the year holds. It is really difficult, of course, to prepare a budget at the moment because of all the uncertainty. But I think the key is actually just putting the numbers on a spreadsheet and just having a play and saying, well, actually, as it stands, if I can bump up revenue 10%, this is what will happen. If revenue doesn't hit what I'm expecting, this will happen. Just have it thought through what you'll do, because the key is what you want to be able to do is say, hey, in 3 months' time, my revenue's hit this target, therefore I'm going to do that. Or revenue's not hit this target, therefore I've got steps in place, I'm going to reduce that, or I'm going to look to change what I'm offering there. It just basically means that you've got options rather than panicking when finances aren't going as you'd like. You've actually got options and some plans for what to do. And now's a great time to do that budget, purely because you've in theory got a bit of downtime to think about that. Just noticed that we've actually about to run over the hour. I've probably got another 20 minutes, so completely understand if you have any put aside now for this and need to exit early. That's absolutely fine. We are recording the webinar. We will make it available, but if you can stick on, we'll keep going through this. I have got a couple more questions as well, so I'll just jump on and answer those. Okay, I've got a question here. If we have paid salaries of 80%, but things improve business-wise, can we retrospectively top up salaries? Absolutely. I mean, essentially, if you top up salaries, that's essentially a bonus. So you're more than entitled to pay a bonus. I would just suggest, though, you've done your numbers and make sure you actually can afford to do the top up. Because if things pick up, it's great, but there is still a lot of uncertainty around where the business is going to go, where the economy is going to go. So my recommendation would be possibly not at this stage, unless you really think you've got the cash. But that's got to be up to you. Not so much a question, but a statement, which is great. We've found a company in New Zealand selling webcams if anyone needs one. I guess in that situation, if you do need a webcam, then let me know and I'll put you in touch with the person who's raised that comment. Next question is, what is my personal gut feeling? Are we back to work site at the end of 4 weeks, or do you think the centre is going to lock up for longer? Look, really difficult question to answer. I mean, if you read or watch the latest press conferences, it looks like things are going really well. Actually, the number of cases has dropped off. We've got people recovering from it. Lockdown is by and large working. I think there's an article in the paper today that the US think we've done an amazing job. I mean, obviously they haven't done the best job themselves. So it isn't hard to look good compared to them. But there is, I guess, I think it's really difficult to answer whether we're back in 4 weeks. I think the key will be plan that you are back in 4 weeks, and if it is going to be longer, then again have a plan in place for that. There has been talk, potentially I've heard, whether certain regions would get back to work quicker. Probably the more heavily populated areas like the big towns and cities may not, because there's obviously room for that to spread any disease. But I guess I think the key is there. Let's just we'll certainly be in touch with when we hear anything from the government, but you'll hear it at the same time. I think just monitor the situation, monitor the news, but make sure you're in a position to head back to work in 4 weeks if you can. I've got a question here. Could I ask the group, as a majority of us have no revenue for the month of April, what level of discount on their rent are they asking for landlords? Okay. The best way to jump in and answer that, since I don't have a poll for that, if you could all just jump onto the chat and perhaps just put your answer in there. So you should have a chat button. Perhaps just jump in now and answer what level you've asked for your landlord from, or what your landlord's offered, just in terms of the discount that they've offered. So hopefully we'll get a few people jumping onto the chat and answering that question. Okay, I've got a few answers there. So I should just mention, can you see everyone's answers on the bottom right? Maybe just raise your hand if you can see everyone's answers. Please, someone just raise their hand just to make sure I can see the answers. I want to make sure you can see the answers as well. Okay, so no one's raising their hand. Does that mean that you can't see the answers, or you can see the answers that everyone's typing? Can't see the answers. Okay, right. Well, that hasn't worked, has it? Great. Okay. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll just go through what the answers have got. I think I've changed it now that everyone can see the answers, but I might not have had that setting right, so that's all good. So I'll just read through the answer we've got now. So we've got one that one person's received 0 rent discount. What I would recommend there is that you do talk to your landlord, because from my understanding is that you can't, the landlord can't charge full rent if you can't use the building. And if the landlord doesn't help there, I'd suggest chatting to your lawyer, because a 0% discount actually isn't okay, and you definitely shouldn't be paying your full rent. One person's received 25%. One person's received 50%. One person's had no rent to pay, which is great. Another person's received no discount. And someone's offered no rent. Someone's received no rent reduction. One person's received 100% rent for both April and May. That's certainly a very generous landlord. Someone's received no discount. So I think there's probably, what it says is there's quite a range. Now, I will just say that I think it's really important you do talk to your landlord in the first instance, because they do have a mortgage to pay as well. There are some certain clauses, I believe, in standard rental agreements, which is a legal issue, that pretty much mean that a landlord's got to give a heavy discount in the month. But at the same time, I say, because they've got mortgages to pay too, I think ideally, if you've got a good relationship with your landlord, then you actually sit down with them and discuss just what it is that you can pay. Because at the end of the day, I think it's a much better position to be in if you can kind of meet somewhere in the middle and build that good relationship, or keep the good relationship with your landlord, because you might need that relationship later on. but I'd certainly suggest that expecting you to pay 100% of your monthly rent, it's probably not something that would be enforced. So if I'd be recommending talking to your landlords. For those that have offered 100% discount, well, that's obviously fantastic. I think you're still in the minority there, but good on you for having that. And obviously you've got a very understanding landlord. But just bearing in mind, obviously all different landlords are in different financial positions. So I think it's pretty unfair to expect all landlords to give 100%, but obviously whatever they can give is great. Okay, another question. Are there any impacts of accrued annual leave that we need to be mindful of, i.e. as staff can't take leave at present? The annual leave does accrue as per usual. So I guess if the lockdown lasts for too long, the annual leave levels could build up. And maybe then that's when if the staff approach you to actually use annual leave in addition to their 80%, that's an option. But I would recommend you don't actually suggest that they do take annual leave. Purely because that's an employment issue, and I think down the track, if it was sort of proven that you pressured staff into taking annual leave, then you could find yourself in a bit of trouble. Cool. Okay, right. I'll just get back to the slides then. I've got no further questions, but do keep the questions rolling through. Okay, let's move on from here. Okay, what to do during lockdown in terms of your staff? So I think first and foremost, pay them what they're entitled to. So that's 80% of their normal wages, or the minimum, or the actual wage subsidy, or if they earn less than the wage subsidy, pay them 100%. Really important that staff are paid what they're entitled to, and of course under the wage subsidy, you are required to do that. Stay in touch with staff. I think really important, to make sure they're doing okay as well, because they could well be stressed. They've probably got rent to pay or mortgages to pay, families to feed. So make sure you stay in touch. Also, just sort of helps that they're in a good position to head back to work when you do reopen. I think really, one thing I've probably seen from a few clients, I've actually got their staff doing some training or working on admin. At the end of the day, if you're paying them 80% of their wages, they're actually entitled to work 80% of their normal hours. So if you had a situation where staff weren't doing training because they were busy or catching up on admin, now's the time to do that. Get them to do that. It also keeps them sort of busy and active, so then they're in a good position, hopefully, to head back to work. Maybe even talk to your staff about improvements that they think you could make in your business. Just kind of keep them active, but also make sure you are utilise them, since you are paying their wages. Make sure that they are actually being productive for you. Also, I think it's really important, not discuss it with your staff at the moment, but think about their role once the wage subsidy finishes. I think invariably there are going to be job losses. As Grant Roberts has made that very clear. I think there will definitely have to be job losses. So really have a think now and give it time. What I don't want suggest people doing is that you kind of wait till the lockdown finishes and go, oh, by the way, there's no job for you. Kind of think about, like, my business has changed. Can I actually deploy a staff member in a different role? Or if not, look, if you've got to make them redundant at the end of the 12-week period, then I guess unfortunately that might be the case. Again, maybe if you are thinking of making staff redundant, that you can pay them, perhaps just reach out to me. I'm not going to talk you out of it, but just make sure you've done your homework. But I think it's important to be thinking about that during lockdown, as if your business is going to change. What does it mean for your staff? If your staff do get made redundant, MSD do have some funding available for staff. If they lose their job, there's usually a 1 to 2 week stand down period. I understand they've waived that for staff that lose their job. So make sure if you do have to let staff go, that you do let them, make them aware that they can get some funding from MSD. That's also the case for the accommodation supplement, just where we're on that. So if staff can't afford to pay their rent and they come back to themselves, I need to get paid more because they can't pay the rent, maybe get them to reach out to MSD, because they do have an accommodation supplement that could top up their wages. That could top up their bank balance to be able to pay the rent. Okay. So what to do during lockdown in terms of suppliers? So this is a tricky one, because I think a lot of business owners obviously want to be preserving cash. But at the end of the day, if you don't pay your suppliers and they can't pay their suppliers and so on and so forth, that's a whole vicious cycle. So I would urge everyone to pay your suppliers what you owe them where possible. but only if possible. If you can't afford to pay them, then I think make sure you get in contact and maybe set up some kind of payment plan. But just be mindful that if you don't pay a supplier, they're probably going to struggle to pay these suppliers and top up the 80% of wages for their staff. So I think open and honest was what I'd recommend. Just I guess really make sure that you're trying to stay in touch with them. And look, some suppliers might be happy to defer what amount you owe them, but just make sure you've had that communication. I'm just going to jump into another poll. That's the staff poll. And this is purely confidential. What I meant to say is, at the start of this conversation, is any information you share, please keep it to yourself, just because, we want to make sure we can all share information in the confidential forum. So please don't go sharing any individual case studies with your friends or family, because everything in here has to be confidential. So when it comes to increasing or decreasing staff as per the poll, please answer as honestly as possible. Rest assured, I can't even tell who's answering what question. So just be interesting to sort of see what everyone's looking to do. Okay, so to share that result. So I think it's fair to say I would be surprised if people were looking to increase their staffing levels. I think that's understandable. Yeah, look, I think unfortunately, not surprising, we've got some people saying they're going to decrease staff levels. I think that's inevitable in some businesses. But encouragingly, if you're going to keep staff levels the same, that does suggest that you think your business is going to be okay, which is great. So I'll just jump on to another poll as well while we're here. Okay. This is again around cash flow, whether you're going to be able to pay your suppliers. Again, completely confidential. I can't tell who's answering what question. Just be good to kind of know whether you think you'll be able to pay your staff, pay your suppliers when they're due over the next 2 months. Okay, just in that poll now. Okay, so look, encouragingly, the most popular answer is yes, you can pay your suppliers in full. Most of them is a few answers there, and you're going to struggle. I think for those that have said they're going to struggle, I would recommend reaching out to your suppliers as soon as possible, just to let them know, see whether there's some payment arrangement that you can come to with them. Just because I think they'll all be going through a similar situation, so it's important for them to know whether they're going to get paid by you as early as possible, because then they can look to make alternative arrangements. Okay, got a couple more questions. Actually, no, we don't. There's no more questions at all, so I won't go into that. I'll go back to the slides. Okay, next one is your bank. Okay, so I think the bank's going to become a very important part in your lives for a lot of you over the next probably few weeks to few months. So recommendations here, get in contact with your bank to see how they can help. I mean, a lot of people prefer not to talk to their bank if they can avoid it. My view has always been that it's quite good to have your bank on side, because it's really be really good for when you need them. A couple of options available with the banks. You can go on a mortgage deferral. You'll see I've crossed out the word holiday. There did seem to be quite a bit of press that a mortgage holiday was this fantastic thing, tropical beaches, it's all great. The reality is a mortgage holiday, which I'll get onto soon, is a good option if you can't afford to pay your mortgage payments, but bear in mind interest is accruing. So in a lot of cases, you will be going backwards. And that's why, on your loans, that's why going to interest only on loans is a better option than a mortgage deferral, because essentially it means that you're paying the interest as you go, you're not paying principal, but your loan's not increasing. And so the banks will be willing to offer interest only loans. Will go into interest only for that reason. Some of you would have heard of the Business Finance Guarantee Scheme. It was announced by the government, I think, about a week ago, and the banks have kind of been scrambling to put the offering out there. I've got a slide next around that, so we'll go into more details about it then. Another thing is overdraft. Look, I mean, if you think that your cash flow issues might be temporary, then perhaps talk to your bank about an overdraft. The government and the Reserve Bank have put a bit of pressure on banks to be able to offer these products and services. They're going to probably relax their rules a little bit, but bearing in mind the bank's usual finance and lending credit criteria will normally apply. So if you couldn't get a loan or overdraft in the past, you might struggle to get one now. But I think absolutely reach out and talk to your bank. So just some more information on the mortgage holiday or deferral. I see that Kiwibank's actually changed it to a mortgage deferral as opposed to a holiday. The picture of the pig on the beach is certainly what was initially portrayed, in my opinion, by Grant Robertson when he mentioned it. The reality is how it works is that you can stop paying your loan repayments in full for 3 to 6 months on residential and commercial properties. There was some talk that it was just available to residential loans. That is not the case. The banks offer it on both residential and commercial properties. And pretty much if you ask for it, you're going to get it because the Reserve Bank and the government have pretty much put the pressure on banks to make sure that they do allow their customers to get that. Bear in mind, interest will accrue on the loans, so it's not a holiday. If you're not paying any loan payments, then if you make it last 6 months, the mortgage deferral. I had heard a stat, if you're on 4% interest rate, essentially it's adding $15,000 on a $500,000 loan. It's adding $15,000 to the loan because you've got the interest accruing, which is increasing the loan, and then there's the interest on that accrued interest as well. So I would recommend interest only if you can afford it. But at the end of the day, I do appreciate that cash flow is tight, and so maybe the mortgage holiday is the way to go. This is of course on, say just on your residential and commercial properties. At the end of the day, a lot of people have made some good capital gains on property. So hence why I think the mortgage deferral is still an option if you can't afford to pay interest only, because in most cases, you've actually made a good capital gain. I would recommend holding off selling your property if you can avoid it, purely because there's a lot of talk about property prices going down. And you don't really want to sell your property when prices are low. So I think, definitely do a mortgage deferral before selling your house. But interest only would be my recommendation if you can afford that. Or ultimately, if you can keep paying principal interest, then great, do that. But this is on the basis I'm expecting a lot of you will have reduced cash flow at this time. The Banking Business Finance Guarantee Scheme. So a lot of the banks have released their actual process, I think on Monday. Essentially how it works, if your business turnover is between 500,000 to 80 million, in actual fact, that's a typo, that should say 250,000. So that's my bad, sorry, I will change that slide. So you've got to have turnover above 250,000 up to 80 million. I think 80 million would be a nice target to have, but I think a lot of you will be a bit below that. With the deal, you can get a loan of up to 500,000, and you've got to pay it off within 3 years. So, I think that 3-year loan is quite a short loan term in the scheme of things. The government will guarantee 80% of the loan, and the bank 20%. So for that reason, the banks will be a bit more willing to give the loans out, because if you get people defaulting, then the government's actually going to pay for 80% of the amount defaulted. One of the terms is you need to have already drawn down existing lending facilities. If you've got an overdraft facility in place that you haven't drawn down, you won't be able to enter into the Business Finance Guarantee Scheme, or the Business Finance Loan, we'll call it, until you've used up your overdraft. If you've got an existing loan that's not fully drawn down, you do have to draw that down first. It's only for NZ-based businesses. So if it's a business over in Australia, like an Australian branch, you will need to go into your Australian bank for that. New Zealand, the scheme does not apply to businesses based overseas. And most importantly, the normal credit and lending criteria apply. From what I've heard, the banks will bend the rules a little bit, or make the rules a bit easier to get a loan. But they are not required to bend the rules by much. So essentially, if you can't get a loan at the moment, this probably isn't your golden ticket. You've still got to pass lending criteria. And that really essentially means, have you got equity you can put up? And have you got the cash flow to pay the loan back? That's a tricky one, mainly because I think a lot of people's cash flow at the moment is difficult to predict. But I think ultimately the key here is, if you think you're going to need cash to keep the business going, you've got done your forecast and you can prove that the business will pick up, but you just need cash to get through, maybe the Business Finance Guarantee Scheme is for you. But I think the key is just talk to your bank. and explain your situation, and they'll be able to help potentially with some products that they can put in front of you that's going to be best for your business. I will just jump on there with another poll. Don't worry, there's not too many more polls, but it's quite interesting for me to sort of see what everyone is feeling. Have you contacted your bank? Not sure if anyone actually answered that poll. I don't know whether that's because you haven't or the poll didn't come up, but we will move on anyway. Oh, got a new message there. It didn't show up. Well, that could be a technology fail. Not sure what happened there. In any case, it was more just, I guess, just trying to see whether you had contacted your bank. As I mentioned, really important, I think you do. Hopefully you've got a good relationship with your bank, but you're much better off going to them in advance saying, look, I could have an issue going forward. I want to look at getting some funds off you in the future, as opposed to saying, right, my business is actually in a real bad state. I need funds now. The bank may not be able to help you if you go to them. It's very much the ambulance at the top of the cliff rather than at the bottom of the cliff. So I would urge you to contact your bank if you can. Okay. Now, probably a thing a lot of people maybe aren't thinking about is the marketing side. Now's a really good chance to think about what you're going to do marketing-wise for when you come out of the lockdown. But I think just in general, though, I'd really encourage you to stay in touch with your clients during the lockdown. You see how they're doing. Make them aware that you are going to be back in trading in no time. They can start to build you into their plans, because if they're a business that relies on you to supply goods or services, it's actually good for them to know that you're going to be able to do that post the lockdown, because then they can start to make their plans. Also, I think it's good to build rapport with your clients, see if you can help them in any way, but just make sure you're staying in touch. That could be an individual phone call, or it could be maybe a blog or an email you send out to all your clients, but I would recommend you do stay in touch. I'd also recommend designing a reopening or a back to work campaign. Essentially what I'm saying there is to have a think about what you're going to do post-lockdown. Do you have to rejig your business, advertise to your clients that you're back trading, even if you know that lockdown is going to finish in a couple of days, maybe let your clients know, look, we're going to reopen again, available for business. Really important, I think, you think about that now, because then if you can design a campaign, you can actually sort of roll that as soon as Jacinda says, well, we're out of lockdown, we can go back to work. You can just click the button and everyone knows essentially what you're going to be doing in terms of your business. I think also really important in any material you send through to your clients is that you make it clear that you're taking all steps to counter COVID-19. So if you're like a retail business where you've got personal contact, I think really important to just give your clients the comfort that you've taken all steps to avoid the spread. So whether it's a case of having hand sanitizer nearby or wiping down all surfaces, making sure staff that have got flu-like symptoms don't turn up, even making sure customers that have flu-like symptoms don't come in the shop. Really important you set some really strict rules in place, and most importantly, make sure your clients know that you've got those steps in place. But now is a good time to start thinking about what am I going to do marketing-wise when lockdown finishes. So now is the part where I don't quite know how it's going to work, but essentially I'm keen for you to share your stories. So of what's working for you, because you're all business owners, very experienced business owners in a lot of cases, and what I've shared is really, I guess, my thoughts on my experience, but really keen to hear what you've got to share. Ideally speaking, I'm just going to stop the screen share. If you could put your hand up, and I could turn on your microphone, and then you could perhaps share your story about what's working for you. Now, we'll just say I've got a couple of hands up. I'm not sure when those hands went up. So what I am going to do is I'm just going to lower everyone's hands now. And then if you do want to put your hand up and share a story, please put it up from now on, and I'll turn your microphone on. Uh, don't all put. Here we go. Okay, great, Danny. I'll just put your microphone on now, and then you'll be able to talk to the group.
Cool. Working?
Thanks, Danny.
Hi.
All of yours.
So yeah, I'm Danny. I've got Hebe Boutique, so I've got a clothing store. We have an online store as well, and I just want to say that what has been working for me, just touching on keeping connected with your customers, that's just been probably more my focus while we've been in lockdown. I haven't done as much budget work as you're saying, Simon, but I've done a lot of marketing. And a lot of engagement, a lot of social media, and it's definitely working for me. Like, I'm getting a good response from the customers. I'm getting lots of messages, lots of conversation, and I feel like it's kind of indirectly led to interest online, which is not necessarily what I expected at first. But yeah, it's been really good. Even with the release of the restrictions with the NBIE letting stores send like non-food essential items out online, we do actually have the option to send goods out from our website, and despite that loosening, I kind of thought that for us that kind of went against our ethics, so I actually put a post up online just saying that we really need the cash flow right now, but we're not going to take that up and use that loophole and send our product out. So I actually ended up getting such a massive response from customers about that, just about our choice, and I ended up getting a whole pile of online orders from that I can't send out yet, obviously, but it was really nice because I just feel like connecting with your customers and actually sort of staying true to you and talking about your values and your personal side of things as well does actually get you somewhere with people, especially at a time like this. So yeah, it's definitely worth spending a little bit of time on, I think.
Great, thanks for that, Danny. I think that's actually a really good story of where you've actually communicated with your customers, and probably in that situation, whilst you probably lost out on some revenue in the short term, you're probably going to have built some longer term relationships that are going to benefit you, sort of in the next medium to long term. So that's really good. Thanks for that, Danny. Do we have anyone else that wants to share? If you could put your hand up, that would be great. Okay, it's just definitely silence. You can always share your comment through the chat, or if you don't want to speak. What have we got? Have we got anyone's hand up? Oh, Adair's got a hand up, so I'll just put your microphone on. Right, Adair, you should be able to speak.
My microphone works.
Yeah, it is working. Yep.
Okay. I'm marketing. I'm wondering if the group might be under more of a networking. I'm looking to come to work on my website and logo and whatnot. And wondered if anyone else.
Sorry, Adair, could you just maybe start again? It was a bit muffled to start with, but it got better towards the end.
I was trying to as far as marketing, I'm keen to use time to work on my website and logo and whatnot, and wondered if there's anyone within the group who work like that might be in that sort of field, or have people within their own network who are in that field who are looking to pick up work during this time.
Okay, I might just repeat that because for me it was a bit muffled still, but I'll just I think I heard that, so I'll just make sure that I repeat it. So essentially, what Adair was saying is that she's keen to work on her marketing side, so on her logo, website, etc. So looking through the group here, there's actually and correct me if I'm wrong, there's no one that she does that service, but I'd suggest a few of you may have some people that you recommend. So could you please maybe just in the chat section list who you use for your marketing and logo design, or of course if you're happy to help yourself, that'd be great. But it'd be great if we could just share with Adair, who you're using for your website and your logo, etc. Okay, so we've got one person saying, is Tara Anna Simpson 49? So it's good, starting to get a few through. Now, just can everyone actually see those chats? It should be set up so you can all see the comments. Maybe if someone just comment whether you can all see those comments coming through, that'd be great. No one can see. Great. Okay, might have to work on that. In that case, Adair, what I'll do is after the call, I will just send through a list of what everyone's recommended. Oh, they can see it now. Okay, great. Oh, someone's saying we can, someone's saying we can't. Adair, can you see those different comments coming through? I'll just put your microphone back on. Can you see those comments, Adair?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I can. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yep. Hopefully that was useful then. Fantastic. Yep. Okay. I'll just mute you then. Okay. Is there anyone else that wants to share a story, even ask a question? Of course, that's all good as well. Just put your hand up or. Okay. Just give it another 10 seconds. Okay, that's all good. Look, I mean, obviously, appreciate you're all under a bit of pressure, and but what I would recommend is that you do still share what you're doing with each other, perhaps out of this forum, because I think it's really important to hear what each other's doing. Really think it's important that even if you are competitors, you almost put aside that sort of competitive mindset to get through this, and then obviously maybe start focusing on competing afterwards. Got a couple more questions that come up, so I'll look to answer them. Right, so first question coming through is, how long will the business finance scheme be available for? I actually don't know the answer. I believe it's going to be available for the next at least 6 months, but it hasn't been clarified. I think the key would be if you need the cash now or the lending now, just talk to your bank and they'll be able to advise how long they offer it for. Okay. Another question is, a medical company have advertised Perspex screens for $100 plus GST if anyone needs them. Okay, well, that's another helpful comment. So if you need a Perspex screen, $100, that's pretty good. So that's obviously in your shop to make sure people aren't, I guess, coughing or sneezing on you. I mean, hopefully they wouldn't be in your shop if they were coughing and sneezing, but the Perspex screens for $100 plus GST seems like a pretty good one. Oh, so I had a comment here. They didn't tell me they needed the mic. So in that situation, if you've got a question, perhaps if you could just type it in the chat or the Q&A, then I can read the question out or the comment out if you'd like to type in there. What else have we got? Right. It seems as the comment about the cup of tea and scones has come up again. Unfortunately, there still is no tea and scones unless you've been putting it on while we've been talking. In which case, I hope you enjoy them. I will now just jump back. We've got many more slides still to go, but just jump back to our slides. Okay. Pretty much, I guess it's just questions now, but we've already been answering them. So I think the key is, look, stay safe and well. Look, stay in lockdown. It's going really well so far. I mean, we hear that that the cases are on the decrease. Obviously, it is a really stressful time for a lot of you. So I do urge you to reach out to your networks, stay in touch. We're obviously here to help. Maybe hear what other businesses are doing. And look, in the case of someone like China, they're on the way out of it. So there's no reason why we can't, sort of all stay in lockdown for 2 more weeks at least. Hopefully it is just 2 weeks. And if we all do that, then, we can get back to business. I think it's important to note, though, I mean, it's probably unlikely business will return to normal as it always was. It's really unknown. So I think the more you can do to plan in these next 2 weeks, at least 2 weeks, will be really important. If you've got questions, please reach out. I will be making this webinar available. I'll be sending out the link probably in the next day or two. So if you did want to sort of revisit it, then please do so. We do have a webinar this afternoon for contractors. Probably doesn't apply to most of you. We've also got one tomorrow for landlords of both commercial and residential. So if you did want to be invited along to either of those ones, 1:30 this afternoon for the contractors or 10 o'clock tomorrow for the landlords one, please reach out, email or give me a call. Apart from that, look, I hope you found the seminar or webinar useful. If you've got questions or follow-up comments, please email them through. I will just leave the Q&A section active, and I'll just maybe give it a couple of minutes, any more sort of last questions before we do wind up, questions or comments, and then I will answer those. So I'll just give it maybe a couple of minutes. I've got a question, where can we buy the screens from? So I'll just jump back up. In fact, it doesn't say. So look, it's actually Doug. Doug, you've obviously mentioned you can buy the screens. Could you perhaps email through the details where you can buy the screens from? Then I'll email out that along with the recording of the webinar. I think you're obviously really a good resource to make sure your staff stay safe. I mean, you've seen them all in the supermarkets. So perhaps if Doug, if you could send the details through of where to find the screens, that would be great. Comment here is, would it be possible to have a list of who is in the group and what they do to be able to reach out with each other? Yeah, good question. Look, I think, yeah, I mean, I'm certainly happy to share that. What I will say is, could you please all just raise your hand if you're happy for me to send through your details to each other. I think obviously reaching out to each other is going to be really important if you can. But just I'll make sure you're happy to share your details before I actually go ahead and do that, because obviously it's all private information. So maybe just for the next 10 seconds, if you just put your hand up. Looks like pretty much everyone's putting their hand up. Not quite everyone. So if you haven't put your hand up, can you please do so? Assuming you want to share the details. Okay, so that is everyone. Okay, great. Okay, so in that case, what I will do is I will send through a list of your contact details and what it is that you do. I mean, obviously, if we send out private information, please make sure you don't then pass on that information to anyone else. It's just for your own benefit. But I think, obviously the more you can reach out and support each other, that's really going to help during this time. So, okay. Well, I don't have any more questions, so I think that's going to bring the seminar to a close. And so I hope you found it useful. Perhaps if you could just maybe email me through with kind of your thoughts and feedback, and say, this is our first webinar we've run. We've got 2 more to do. We may look at doing more webinars in the future, but really just kind of keen to find out what's worked, what's not worked. Do apologise, there were a couple of technology fails. It is new software that we're using, but hopefully we'll be able to get rid of those gremlins. But you're really keen to hear your feedback. So I'm going to call it to a close now, but yeah, please come back to me maybe in an email just with your feedback. Okay. Thanks, everyone. And again, we're working at Breville Accounting normal hours, so please don't be a stranger. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well, and yeah, make sure you do some of that planning we talked about. Thanks, everyone.